do have a new poll out this morning showing a close race for the White House across 6 battleground states. The latest CNN SSRS poll finds Vice President Kamala Harris with an advantage over former President Donald Trump among likely voters in Wisconsin, 50 to 44%, as well as in Michigan, where she's up 48 to 43%. Harris is also up by 1 in both Georgia and Nevada, while the two are deadlocked in Pennsylvania with 47% each. Trump, meanwhile, is up in Arizona, 49 to 44%. Interesting. We should note that all these races fall within the poll's margin of error.
I mean, how big are these margins of errors? I mean, there'll be one race where Harris will be up by 47 points, and we say, what's within the margin of error?
Well, I guess it's 5. Is it 5 points?
I don't know, but she's up 6 points in Wisconsin. 4.9. So I think 6 is outside. I don't know. Anyway, so Willie, you know, these polls, again, all over the place. There's some polls that show her ahead in Arizona, behind in Michigan. But the bottom line is, again, as I always said when I was in politics, as I've said since I've got out of politics, it's not about the exact number. It's about trend lines. And if you look at trend lines, things are looking very good right now in early September with a long way to go. But things are looking very good over the past 3 weeks for Kamala Harris.
Yeah, I mean, whoever the candidate was at the top of the Democratic ticket, it was still going to be a close race. But I think what Democrats are doing is comparing this to the parallel universe in which Joe Biden stayed in the race. And he was trailing. And those trend lines you're talking about were headed in the wrong direction. Kamala Harris has stepped in over the last month and reversed that. So, yes, she's outside of the margin of error in Wisconsin in this poll. She's right there in Michigan as well. Pennsylvania closer than they'd like it to be. But we've always known these states were going to be that close. What she's done is flip some of them, at least momentum-wise, and in some of these actual numbers in her direction. There's also something we're looking at closely here is where she sits on the issues. There's a USA Today Suffolk University poll in which Kamala Harris leads Donald Trump among likely voters 48 to 43. But when it comes to the economy, a top concern for voters, 51% favor Trump versus 45 for Harris. But in June, Trump had a 14-point advantage over President Biden. So again, some growth there for her. On immigration, Trump leads Harris by just 3 points now, 50 to 47. That's within the margin of error. That's down from Trump's 13-point lead over Joe Biden. On the question of national security, Trump up 51%, 46 over Harris, down from a 10-point advantage Trump held over Biden. You see the trend here. On the issue of health care, Harris has a double-digit lead, 54 to 40% over Trump. That's up from a 10-point advantage Joe Biden held in June. So there, John, again, trend lines, not just in the polling overall, but on specific issues that Democrats felt like they had to pull back and at least get closer to Donald Trump.
No doubt. Those margins have really shrunk. That is very encouraging for Democrats. The Harris team, circulating numbers, similar, the internals look like this as well. They're still down, but they've closed the gaps, and they think there is room to grow. And back to the battleground states, I mean, those Michigan and Wisconsin numbers are so positive for Harris and show real trends. But there are 2 states in particular that jump out there. And this election might come down to those 2 states, Georgia, Pennsylvania. And they're basically 1 point or tie. And because Michigan and Wisconsin, not enough for Harris. She needs to get one of those 2. And it is in her campaign, and Democrats have privately been noting for a while that her numbers in Pennsylvania lag behind where they are in Wisconsin and Michigan, in those 3 blue wall states. And that's why she's going to be camping out there this coming week, campaigning in the Pittsburgh area ahead of that first debate. President Biden was just there on her behalf. He'll keep going there. Pennsylvania, a huge, huge state for her. And if she can't win there, then she needs to offset that with Georgia, where she's had real enthusiasm, but natural disadvantages there for a Democrat. It is very, very, very close.
You know, it's so fascinating, Peter Baker. It's very easy to look at the cynicism that's displayed by politicians and become cynical yourself. And on the issue of immigration, where Donald Trump kills the toughest border security bill in the last 30 years, and say, don't vote for it, blame it on me. We don't want to give this issue to the Democrats. It's very easy to sit back and become cynical yourself. I'm talking about myself, not you as a reporter, but to go, my gosh, you know what? They're going to get away with this. This cynicism, how could, are people going to really be this dumb? You look at these polls, the answer is no, they're not. I mean, you look at 3-point margin on immigration. When the first 3 years, as you know very well and reported on it, immigration has been a sore subject at the White House. The southern border at times has been chaotic. You look at the numbers of illegal immigrants that have come over in the first 3 years. This was a huge issue to Joe Biden. And then they tried to push that bill through, and it was Donald Trump and Republicans that killed the conservative border security bill. And now you look, Kamala Harris has done exactly what politicians should do, turn weaknesses into strengths. She has run straight at this issue, and you see a 3-point margin. I'm curious, are you surprised it's only 3 points, or do you see all the things Harris has done up to this point making that make more sense?
Yeah, look, this is really fascinating because you're right. I mean, if you watch Trump's rallies, and I was looking through a bunch of them yesterday for something I'm working on, it is striking how much immigration is the core of his message this year, aside from the 2020 election. Everything comes back around to the border, to immigration. It is as if he was running a one-issue campaign at times. And if that issue isn't working for him, he's really going to have a hard time in the fall. And it's really fascinating. If the three biggest vulnerabilities for the Biden-Harris administration domestically, I think, have been the immigration, inflation, and crime, all three of which at some point in their administration were pretty high, all three of which now are low. Right. So inflation is back to a much more normal state. Immigration as the illegal crossings are much reduced since President Biden took executive action after Congress failed to pass that bipartisan bill you talked about. And crime is at the lowest, I think, in many years, according to the latest statistic. Now, of course, prices haven't come down, but the increases are not happening the way they were. And yet that makes it harder for, I think, Trump to get traction on these issues if they're not as salient as they once were. And I think you're seeing that kind of flailing. Now, on the polls, just one last thing I would mention. At Labor Day, at this point in 2016, Hillary Clinton had a roughly 3.7% lead. Of course, she went on to lose. Joe Biden had about a 7-point lead at this point in 2020. Ended up winning by about 4 points. And of course, Kamala Harris today has about 3.3% lead, according to the average of by 538. So a little less than Hillary Clinton did 8 years ago and significantly less than Joe Biden did. So yes, she has changed the momentum. Absolutely. And those trend lines Willie and Joe are talking about are absolutely right. But it's worth remembering how close this is and how much these numbers are, fluid and hard to predict.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a close race. It's in effect tied. As Peter said, and it's really going to be turnout. Donald Trump yesterday lamenting that he got 77 million votes, more votes than he got the first time, but still, and he admitted it for the first time, I guess, lost by a whisker. And that's because Democrats did a better job of getting out voters. So whoever gets more of their side out, it sounds obvious, but it's true. They win. It is, as always, it's a battle for getting out the vote. David French, I want to go to another issue, obviously an issue that matters a great deal to you, but an issue that has been turned upside down since Dobbs. And I've got to say, I've said several times over the past couple of years that I really haven't seen an issue shift as dramatically as I've seen abortion shift in a very long time. It reminds me of Prop 13 in California in 1978 that really signified something big happening in 80 with the Reagan Revolution starting in earnest. But you now have women under 45 saying the most important issue is not the economy anymore, it's abortion. You have Donald Trump flip-flopping, now saying he's going to be a champion of women's reproductive rights. You have him saying that he will vote against the 6-week bill in Florida, the 6-week ban in Florida. He, of course, keeps shifting. He keeps going back and forth. You have the Texas race, according to the University of Houston poll in the Senate, getting very close, in part because of abortion. Ted Cruz leading Colin Allred by 2 points. And suddenly abortion not mentioned so much by Republicans anymore. Talk about the shifting landscape and what challenges it poses, especially for Donald Trump, who, again, we've talked about evangelicals falling in line and their bargain, their cynical bargain, their bargain that I mocked from the very beginning, like supporting a pro-choice candidate who transparently shifted to be pro-life to get their vote. And then they gave him a license to do whatever he wanted to do. Now we're seeing once again that cynical deal evangelicals made with Donald Trump seems to be going up in smoke.
Yeah, it really is. And I'll tell you what happened is, there are a lot of pro-life folks who justified supporting Trump because they said he has the strength and the tenacity to pursue pro-life goals more so than establishment Republicans or more normal Republicans, that he would be stronger actually on this issue. And now Republicans have ended up with the most watered down pro-life plank. It's not even really a pro-life plank. It's more functionally pro-choice than any time in decades. And then Trump himself flip-flopping all over the place, first saying the Florida 6-week ban is too strict, indicating he might vote for this pro-choice amendment, then flopping back at that after a lot of online outrage. It's an absolute mess. And I would say if you talk to a smart, reasonable pro-life activist, they would not have foreseen the total public backlash that has been ongoing since Dobbs, that has taken an awful lot of people by surprise. The pro-life movement hasn't fully reacted to that, and Donald Trump is the worst possible standard bearer.
David, and how ironic is it that we conservatives, you and I, we are conservatives. Trump Republicans are not conservatives. I said it. You don't have to say it. But we conservatives warned for years and railed for years against pushing things on Americans by judicial fiat. And instead of going out and winning on this issue, winning through the hearts and minds of Americans, winning democratically in elections and in grassroots, the Republicans said, Donald Trump Republicans said, we're just going to win at the Supreme Court. The hell with what everybody else thinks. We're just going to win at the Supreme Court, and we'll take that as a victory and run with it.
He plans to give billionaires massive tax cuts and to cut corporate taxes by over $1 trillion, even as they pull in record profits. His plans will add more than $5 trillion to the national debt. He also wants to impose what in effect is a national sales tax. And that is on top of the $2 trillion tax cut. We know how to count. We know how to count.
Harris talking about counting up, how this all works, and balancing what is a populist message with some outreach to certain businesses, at least small businesses. It turns out, according to early analyses, and again, she's only been the nominee for a little while here, her plans could actually be better for U.S. economic growth than Donald Trump's tariff plans. That's according to the Wall Street firm Goldman Sachs. You see the headline. And that kind of cosign is interesting because Harris famously took on Wall Street as the AG of California. She fought bankers to secure a historic $18 billion settlement for the people harmed by the banks and the mortgage industry. And I can tell you, back before she was headlining this Democratic convention, Kamala Harris was explaining her work and how to take on those banks and use the law and fair rules, she said, to help people at a different convention. We have a deep cut all the way back to the Democratic Convention of 2012.
Well, I've seen all that happens when you roll back those rules. What happens are rows of foreclosure signs. What happens are mountains of family debt. What happens is a middle class that's hurting. That's what we've seen in towns across California and across this country. When it comes to the housing crisis.
That's when it comes to the housing crisis. The Harris campaign argues that not only what's old is new again, but that the record, she's one of the more experienced nominees we've seen in a first bid for the White House. The record shows she's serious about this. Now, Donald Trump is not out campaigning. He will be seen today taping a town hall with Sean Hannity. That airs tonight. Against this backdrop, you have to look at how it's all playing. I've emphasized to you it's early in a race that seems late into the general election because of the nominee swap. But we're starting to see data and evidence beyond just the fundraising about what's happening. 1 million new voters now registering, with over 376,000 since Biden left the race. And because the way we vote has changed in America and shows no signs of changing back, we talk about an election day. That's a placeholder from a bygone era. We actually have election weeks in many states. And Trump allies are openly asking if Republicans have not fully adjusted to that, in addition to how Donald Trump has discouraged some of the basic ways that it is legal to vote, like voting early by mail. James Carville, the legendary Democratic strategist, is my special guest, lead off on a big night, and his most recent piece in the New York Times lays out Harris's best strategies to defeat Trump at next week's debate. Welcome, James.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Dealer's choice. You want to start with the debate or the economy?
The economy.
Go ahead.
So since 1989, in job creation, it's 50 million under Democrats, 1 million under Republicans. I defy somebody to compare the growth rate since 1989 among Democratic and Republican presidents. You would find a gigantic advantage for Democrats. I have no idea why the press or the financial people just don't look at the historical record and tell us what it is. 50 to 1. That's a big number. If you get beat 50 to 1, you're getting beat bad, really bad. And that's the jobs number that President Clinton pointed out at the convention. And if they fact checked it and said, well, you know what? He's exactly right. 50 million to 1 million. So you want a strong economy? Vote Democratic.
You know, Kamala Harris has been known as someone who is a realist, a pragmatist, who can sit across the table with people and make a plan and a deal. But she's also known as tough on the banks and not a pushover. I've covered that history on this program. And so it's interesting in that context that she is out here not waiting around for the debate or waiting around for a new theme or only running on the quote-unquote freedom theme, which is important. They're pushing his economic plans, including trying to help small businesses. And over on Fox Business, which is not exactly Harris Central, James, they had some commentators who said, well, they had to admit, or they like this for business. Take a look.
I just want to press the point. When a political candidate comes up with what I think is a good idea, I have to call it a good idea. And a $50,000 tax cut for small, not tax cut, but a tax credit for startups or small businesses, coupled with less red tape. I got to say, that is a good idea, regardless of our other tax ideas.
While that may be a good idea.
The final maybe there is from the RNC chair. Your thoughts?
Well, it's a different philosophy. She's saying if we do small businesses, we grow these small businesses, then you're going to grow the entire economy. The Trump plan is if we just give billionaires more tax cuts, the money will get to us eventually. And I don't know about you, but I deal with small businesses multiple times a day. I deal with billionaires 3 times a year. So I come into contact with a lot more small businesses and a lot more involved in my life and employ a lot more people. And I think it's a distinction that's worth noting, and it's a distinction that look at the record, 50 to 1. It's big. And we know that this works, that if you invest in small business, you invest in education, students, that kind of thing, you're gonna have an economy that perks up, not trickles down.
Turning to the debate, you've been around many of these presidential debates. This one is particularly high stakes. These two people have never debated, let alone even met. We expect high numbers. The floor in the summer, when fewer people were paying attention with Biden, was about 50 million. We expect a lot more than that next week. We can report tonight the campaigns have agreed on the muted mic system, which is what they used in that summer debate. You have been thinking about this. What do you think is key for Harris?
Well, first of all, people know Trump much better than Harris. So Harris it's got a lot of introducing left to do, and that's very important for her. The second thing is you're exactly right. America loves a train wreck. They saw a train wreck on June 27th. They're going to tune back in, hoping that they see another train wreck, because people love train wrecks. And I think this is sometimes we overhype debates. We overhype the importance of debates. I think in this one, it might be a little bit worth the hype here. We'll see how it turns out. And he kind of needs this. And she needs it, too, because she needs a platform to really introduce herself to the voters of America. People know about her, but don't quite know her yet.
When you look at how dysfunctional, how malformed the current Republican Party is, with Donald Trump as the nominee for the 3rd consecutive election at 78 years old and degrading before our eyes, you may wonder, like I do, like we all do, I think, wow, how we got here. And I think the answer is kind of staring us in the face. The way America's elections and political institutions are structured provides a massive advantage for Republicans. So the United States Senate, of course, which is not a representative body, tilts massively towards Republicans the way that the current parties are sorted. The roughly 580,000 Americans who live in Wyoming, for instance, are represented by exactly the same number of senators as the 39 million people who live in California. And of course, the Electoral College functions in a similar fashion, right? It actually builds off the Senate itself. Even as it appears that Kamala Harris is right now, I would say, a pretty clear favorite to win the popular vote, probably by a margin of 1 million votes at bare minimum. The actual presidential race in terms of the electoral count is extremely close. Harris holds a narrow 1-point lead in the polling average of Pennsylvania, which we see as the tipping point state. And the election's a toss-up, right? So when you have these two structural advantages, and they're enormous, right? One house of Congress, the Senate, and the Electoral College, which elects the president, plus an extremely polarized electorate, you wind up with what I like to call the kind of trust fund Republican Party. It's like rich kids living off their parents' largesse who never have to actually like get off their duff and work for a living, right? Republicans don't need to get off the couch and do the hard work of persuading voters to get to 50+1. Because the Constitution is effectively subsidizing their lifestyle of trolling and golfing and long risks about sharks and electrocution. And that's how you wind up with Donald Trump at the top of the ticket. Again, the Republicans are the clear favorite to win the Senate, despite fielding some truly awful candidates. And the Republican Party can run terrible candidates, and it can lose the popular vote by 3 million, as Donald Trump did in 2016, which is not a small amount. It's like over a percentage point, and still stumble backwards into power. And if there is any silver lining here at all, it is that this massive dysfunction really has cost Republicans some otherwise very winnable down-ballot races in cycle after cycle after cycle, which do not have the benefit of the Electoral College, right? A statewide race and a Senate race, for instance. So the Arizona Republican Party, for example, has effectively collapsed at the statewide level over the past half decade, like improbably, in large part due to candidate quality issues. Kari Lake, who lost the gubernatorial race there 2 years ago, refuses to concede that she is not currently the governor, which she is very much not, seems hell-bent to continue that trend as she runs for the Senate this November. North Carolina's upcoming governor's race is much less competitive than you might expect, thanks to this man, Mark Robinson. He's already been elected statewide, by the way. We've covered him before on the show. He is the current Republican lieutenant governor of the state of North Carolina. He might just be the worst nominee his party has put forth for major office in recent memory, and that is really saying something.
In 2018, Robinson posted that this foolishness about Hitler disarming millions of Jews and then marching them off to concentration camps is a bunch of hogwash. He also said the movie Black Panther was, quote, created by an agnostic Jew to pull the shekels out of your Sforza pockets, using the Yiddish words for money and black.
Everybody knows that abortion in this country is not about protecting the lives of mothers. It's about killing a child because you aren't responsible enough to keep your skirt down or your pants up. There's no reason anybody anywhere in America should be telling any child about transgenderism, homosexuality, any of that filth. And yes, I called it filth.
So that guy, the guy who's talking about pulling the shekels out of your pocket, that guy, he is currently one of 2 men who will run the state of North Carolina. There's only 2 people on the ballot, right? Major parties. His whole backstory is that he found Jesus in the 1980s and slowly but surely reformed his sinful ways. He's now an agent of sort of avowedly Christian nationalist movement working to create a kind of right-wing theocracy in America. This week, we did get a little more insight into his past. According to a new report from the Assembly in North Carolina, which has not been confirmed by NBC News, 6 men, yes, 6 men, there are 6 sources to this piece, say Robinson was a regular customer at multiple adult video stores, often paying to view or purchase pornography as frequently as 5 nights a week. It's practically a job. Now, Robinson's campaign denies these allegations strenuously. A spokesman called the allegations a word we cannot repeat. He called the journalists reporting the story degenerates. But again, multiple named sources on the record, men who either worked at or frequented those stores, including the owner, tell a different story. One guy named Dan Livingston, who again went on the record with his actual name, told the Assembly he used to see Robinson frequent a shop called The Grove. I quote here, Livingston said Robinson usually came in with a pizza, purchased a preview of an adult film, and went into a private booth to watch it and eat. Now, hey, it's a free country, okay? We should know it, of course. Consenting adults have the right to purchase some pizza and then go and produce or purchase that kind of material, pornography, at least for now. Although I should say, Donald Trump's friends at Project 2025 actually want to change that. Quoting again, pornography should be outlawed. The people who produce and distribute it should be imprisoned. Now, I don't think it's super likely that Mark Robinson, who, again, in this article with 6 sources, including a named source, said that he would go frequent this shop 5 nights a week, often with pizza, that he will win his election. But this is an example, again, of the Republican instinct to nominate these kinds of guys, the most extreme antisocial candidates. And they have to be defeated at the ballot box over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, because the only way it will disappear, they keep trying it. As Jonathan Martin put it in Politico this week, if Republicans want to win, they need Trump to lose big. Trump will never concede defeat, no matter how thorough his loss. Yet the more decisively Vice President Kamala Harris wins the popular vote and Electoral College, the less political oxygen he'll have to reprise his 2020 antics. And importantly, the faster Republicans can begin building a post-Trump party. Again, of course, that outcome is far from given, right? Think of it this way. Donald Trump could utterly disappear from public, never appear in public once again from now until Election Day, still have a pretty good shot winning the White House and Republicans flipping the Senate. Like a coin flip, maybe? And that makes it all the more important that, again, the country's pro-democracy coalition does the hard work of preventing that outcome. Because the reality is winning a clear majority is not enough. Listen to this. The Republican Party of the United States, one of 2 major parties, the party has won the popular vote 1 time since the fall of the Berlin Wall. I'll say it again. Only 1 time since the collapse of the Iron Curtain have Republicans managed a national majority in a presidential election. So it is incumbent on Democrats to win by such a large margin that it overcomes the structural advantages against them. Even some Republicans know this is the case, like former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who spoke earlier today in Mark Robinson's home turf of North Carolina.
As a conservative, as someone who believes in and cares about the Constitution, I have thought deeply about this. And because of the danger that Donald Trump poses, not only am I not voting for Donald Trump, but I will be voting for Kamala Harris.
The MAGA movement needs to lose over and over and over again. Democracy will not be on secure footing in this country until the Republican Party internalizes the lesson that nominating extreme, dangerous, maladjusted psychopaths and hoping the quirks of our election bail you out is not enough.
So, Pastor, I'll let you explain a little bit more about what you're seeing and hearing out there on the trail and this phenomenon that we've been talking about for almost a decade now, where some evangelicals say, you know, we're not voting for a saint, we're voting for a president, somebody who will carry out what we hope he'll carry out. And in some cases, he did that, appointing those 3 Supreme Court justices. Are you seeing cracks in that argument now?
Yeah, Willie, actually, we've been seeing those cracks since just after Donald Trump's election in 2016. You know, he received nearly 81% of white evangelical support in 2016. But that went up from the summer of 2016, when July he was down in the 30% range with evangelicals. But then he picked Mike Pence. Mike Pence became a validator, and then he promised to put evangelicals in his cabinet, which he then did. And evangelicals rallied around Donald Trump. And almost immediately after that election, many of them regretted that decision and started to rethink their commitment to Donald Trump. And so our group, Vote Common Good, along with a lot of other groups, started to organize. And in 2018, we launched a bus tour. And that bus tour ran in 2018, 2020, 2022, and is on the road again this year. And we're talking to evangelical voters, many of who have already had their minds changed. You know, a lot of people ask us, how do you go out and change the minds of these evangelicals? And the truth of it is, we don't feel like we have to change their minds. Their minds have already started changing. I mean, to be blunt, Donald Trump is like a self-cleaning oven who does all the work for you if you want to know who he's going to be and how he's going to perform as president. And for a lot of these voters, they're just not comfortable supporting him any longer. And we know that Donald Trump may still receive 70% or 72% of evangelical support, which to someone like me seems entirely too high. But he can't win the swing states of Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia. even Arizona, if he doesn't receive near 80% of evangelical support from white evangelical voters.
Now, Pastor, I've been in politics one way or the other the past 30 years or so. And I always found people respectful. And I will say even, and I've said it on the air too, that most Trump supporters are respectful when walking through airports or going to baseball games. But a lot of times, there are a few that aren't. And I always tell this story because it's so shocking, because I grew up in the Baptist church. I grew up in the Baptist church in, Chamblee, Georgia, in Meridian, Mississippi, mainly in Pensacola, Florida. And a lot of my friends, I'll be honest with you, that I grew up with, that I went to church with 3 times a week, 4 times a week, that I did vacation Bible school with, that I went to Ridgecrest with. I could go on and on. I do not recognize now. And I always tell this story, and Tim Alberta had basically the same story, but I was saying goodbye to my mom at her funeral, and her casket was 2 feet behind me. And somebody I grew up with in church who knew my mom and knew my family, instead of giving me condolences, came up to me and said, I am so concerned you're going to hell because you're not supporting. And I cut her off. I said, if you're about to say, because I'm not supporting Donald Trump, I want you to know I'm going to pray to Jesus tonight that he will forgive you and that you'll find your way, because you were so lost. You were so lost to be doing that at this moment. So I tell you that Tim Alberta's told these stories for people that grew up in the church. I want to know, because I still don't know what has happened to my friends. It's not about politics. This is not about issues. This is about substituting the gospel of Jesus Christ for a failed reality TV talk show host. I just don't understand it. Please explain.
Yeah, Joe, I'm an avid watcher of the show, so I feel like I've followed your tales of your religious journey, and it's very similar to other people's experiences. Look, for a lot of people, their religious identity and their political identity came as a package deal. And they think that deepening into their faith means deepening into their political identity. But just enough people, 5 to 15% of these evangelicals, especially in the swing states where it really matters, want to separate those two identities because they've seen the very same thing you've described. We've all seen it. We wonder what's happened to these people. I've been a pastor for my entire adult life, and I've seen it with people who've been part of my church. And I wonder what has happened to them. But I also know that there's a whole other group of people who've moved the other direction. They've deepened into their faith and separated their political identity from their religious identity. And those are the people that we can focus in the next 62 days to invite them to consider voting for a Democrat. Here's what you probably know to be true, Joe. A lot of these people have never met a Democrat, not a politician, maybe not even a Democratic voter. They literally don't know these people, and they've been told all kinds of lies about them. And once you introduce them to a person of faith like myself and other people who travel with us, we travel in a big bus that says faith, hope, and love, supporting democracy on Election Day. And that's the kind of thing that people come up and they feel confused, right? They see faith, hope, and love, and they know that's evangelical talk. But then they see supporting democracy for all on Election Day, and they think, well, that's not how we Republicans speak about this. And some people are turned off, but so many people are saying, thank you for finally speaking out. Because when the 70% are screaming loudly, that other 30% need to also stand up. And frankly, a lot of evangelicals just get really quiet if they're not going to support Donald Trump, because the things you've described, well, I'll tell you, I get them too. I was on Fox News the other day, and my email box is full of people with the same reminders about, what they consider to be my ultimate outcome. So this is real in people's lives. And we want to do everything we can to encourage people to find what we call exceptional candidates. And we mean this, the kind of candidate that they would make an exception for. They might say, I would never vote for a Democrat, but I just might vote, for that Rebecca Cook in Wisconsin. I just might vote for the candidate this time who has a D beside their name. And we think Kamala Harris has the possibility to make that big shift. And if she can pull 25 or 30% of white evangelicals in the swing states, Donald Trump not only can't win, the MAGA movement doesn't have a future.
Yeah, and for those people out there that are watching that are thinking, oh, well, this is only talk of left-wing, pastors, radical priests, none other than Tim Keller, near the end of his life, said, I no longer call myself an evangelical because that's now more of a political identifier than an identifier of my faith.
So, Richard, let's talk about what Vice President Harris is focused on today, pushing this small business tax break, this plan, and juxtaposing it, I guess, with Donald Trump's corporate tax breaks. How do you see that resonating with voters?
Well, forget how I see it. Goldman Sachs this morning said that the Trump plan between mass deportations and his tax cuts and tariffs in particular would way increase inflation and reduce GDP, whereas the Harris plan would raise them. Moody's says the same thing. I mean, the list goes on and on. So it's not just Democrats talking. These are kind of independent experts. Look, she's trying to kind of accelerate what really was a masterful accomplishment under Biden. 5.5 new business starts last year. The last 3 years set records for new business starts. She's just trying to expand on that. Trump, meanwhile, is talking about the tariffs, which, again, will be very inflationary and I think ultimately kind of counterproductive in terms of, frankly, appealing to the voters. If the whole idea is talking about inflation, she's talking about dealing with price gouging. He's going to increase tariffs up to 60%.
I mean, in most polls, the economy is still the top issue.
Absolutely.
So you got to talk about it.
Yeah.
You got to talk to them on that issue specifically. We have some interesting new battleground polling out today from CNN. Stuart, Georgia, Nevada, Pennsylvania, neck and neck. Harris ahead in Wisconsin and Michigan. Trump ahead in Arizona. All of it within the margin of error. But what's really interesting, between 11% and 15% of voters in these key states say they could still change their minds. Does that surprise you?
No, that's pretty typical. There's no reason, if you get to think about it, unless you're a diehard for one candidate or another, you think you change your mind, you go, sure, why not? I mean, that's kind of how Americans work. We like choices. We like to wait up until the last minute to decide. What really strikes me about today is that one campaign is having an event that is centered on policy. And you can talk about whether or not it's good policy or bad policy. It looks very good to me. But what is Trump? This, again, is just this grievance tour. And it's this lack of messaging and lack of policy that is at the core of the Trump campaign. This mass deportations, I don't know how to break it to the Trump people. This is not a popular thing. People do not want to line up millions and millions of Bluebird buses and go around rounding up people who might be helping them in a business. Tariffs, they are not popular. We're walking to a Walmart and everything's going to cost like 30% more. Really? That's a good thing? So there's a kind of intellectual element to this, a policy element to it, that really shows the failure of the Republican Party to come up with new policy. We once called ourselves the ideas party, the party of new ideas, and substitute it for something that people care about. And I think that is increasingly going to become apparent in this campaign because Trump just keeps saying the same thing over and over and over.
There's also the question of how these campaigns are getting their messages and those policy ideas to the voters. Tim Walz, we know, is in Pennsylvania today and tomorrow. We mentioned how Trump has his town hall in Pennsylvania. The New York Times reports the Harris camp has opened its 50th Pennsylvania office over Labor Day weekend. 16 of those 50 offices are actually in rural counties that Trump won by double digits in 2020. Richard, what does this approach tell you?
It tells you a lot. The fact is, Trump's own people don't trust him. They want to mute the mics. They might as well put a dog collar, a kind of a leash on him and a shock collar because they just don't trust him to talk to anybody other than the base. Sean Hannity, Mark Levin. Whereas Kamala is going into rural areas in Georgia and elsewhere, opening these offices in very rural areas of Pennsylvania. They're reaching out. They're trying to expand. Trump famously said, I don't need more votes. So he's kind of making it clear he really thinks he's going to have to find some way to kind of rig things himself, or else he's just not going to have the votes. And he keeps spouting all this nonsense about having won and whatever. That has to be counterproductive in the long run for anybody who's undecided.
So the Arlington National Cemetery dispute hasn't faded either for Trump. Now, John McCain's son, Jimmy, an Army officer, says Trump's episodes like this with veterans are what prompted him to register as a Democrat. Watch.
Arlington Cemetery is sacred to all people who are members of the military, all people who have served in the uniform. It's a sacred area. There's 3 generations of McCains that are buried there. It's a violation because these rules are set in place. The people who are buried there don't have an opinion. As much as I stayed as an independent, I decided that, it was time to move on and do what I believe in. The fact of the matter that he said it constantly is country first.
Stuart, that's John McCain's son. Could this carry some weight in the important state, Arizona?
Yeah, of course it does. I don't think it carries beyond Arizona. This goes back to the moment that Donald Trump's campaign should have died if the Republican Party had any sort of decency or shame left. When he attacked John McCain, said that he liked war heroes who weren't captured. I mean, a lot of us, when we heard that back in 16, we said, well, this is it. 15 it was. It's over. The guy's he's finished, but he wasn't. And that's when I think a lot of us began to learn that the Republican Party we belonged to was not the Republican Party we thought that we belonged to, that there was a great difference between what we said were values and what were actually being used as marketing slogans. I think this is a terrible issue for the Trump campaign. On some level, they know it. But inside that Trump campaign, you can never just let anything go. You have to always double down because he is incapable of making a mistake. So he does something like this that is offensive to the majority of people, thumbs up photo ops in front of a grave in Arlington Cemetery, and he just has to keep talking about it. And the one thing you can control in a campaign is what you talk about.
Right.
So you have the Harris campaign out here talking about this plan to start new jobs for small businesses, and he's out here still talking about Arlington Cemetery. That's not getting him any votes. I mean, it's exactly what he's saying. You've got to add votes here to win. He lost by 7 million. And that's why he keeps bumping up against 47%.
So when you talk about how it's the candidates who keep going there, I mean, even his running mate, J.D. Vance, is saying this on Fox last night, again, related to this issue of military support.
Nobody wants to put on a uniform and serve in Kamala Harris's military. This is a person who wants the United States Army to be about gender inclusion, ridiculous diversity politics, instead of about serving your country and uniting together as Americans to serve on the same team and defend your nation. If you're a person thinking about joining the military, you're probably not going to want to sign up if Kamala Harris is the potential commander-in-chief.
Richard, your reaction?
I don't think the Republicans want to have this debate. I mean, this Trump is somebody who said they were suckers and losers, people who go into the military. He couldn't even go bring himself to get to that cemetery in France. He said that STDs were his Vietnam. He basically said that, no, he wouldn't gold medal, people, were kind of shot or dead, and they really didn't kind of qualify. The thumbs up, as Stuart said, in front of that grave. I mean, who conducts himself like that? So the notion that somehow that's appealing to people to go into the military is absurd. And I think that people, again, recognize that. And I think, again, across the board, that's just a very unappealing side of them. I don't think the Harris campaign would mind having that debate.
So not a winning message, you're saying?
Hardly, yeah.
Richard Goodstein, Stuart Stevens, thank you both for offering your insights and your perspective.